I stand corrected. I stand corrected.
I just wish that the more times you say it, that we could actually get the answer. But that's the real challenge.
I think the principle of tying actions to outcomes.
Oh, absolutely.
The outcome is not the restoration action itself, but it's actually an increase in the population we're managing.
Absolutely.
That's the part that actually doesn't, it's intuitive once you say it, but it actually isn't the way people manage.
Right.
Because it's the harder thing to do.
Absolutely.
So,
it's easier to measure how many miles of fence you put in rather than how many goats are left.
Yeah. I mean, those are the things you're asked to report on, right? We gave you this amount of money. What did you do with it? The funder doesn't necessarily care about the conservation outcome per se.
However, well, I think they do, but I think they also don't know how to get it.
Yeah,
I will say that
depends on the funder.
that there was this brief period of time when I was with Park Service, kind of at the national level, where there was actually a real effort to try to come up with metrics that were outcome oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to kind of come up with those, and so you ended up using a combination of those, but with intermediate steps that were the more action oriented, not necessarily outcome oriented.
Yeah.
But to be honest, they did pretty good for a while doing that. But that was because Park Service knew they'd get money from the administration if they did that right. But they did it, and I thought it was really interesting. That's why I kind of do hammer on it with you, Melissa. Is that you can do it? It's just you gotta really think what it is you're after, and then you tailor it to it, and you have to show that link between that outcome and your action.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where it falls apart usually.
Yeah, that's where the deep training and decision analysis, where you start from values. You say, what do we define success as? And you work backward from there. So keep your eye.
Likewise, how do you define failure? And I think people always look for the success, and I say you learn more from failures in many ways, because then you can.
It's almost more fundamental than that, though. It's not even about your ability to reach success criteria, but how do you implement adaptive management if you don't know what your success criteria are?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
All these challenges. I just wish more people could experience ESRC.
I'll keep requiring my students to come in the fall.
That's a really good part, because I mean it's a real challenging thing. I mean, this is a challenging committee.
But now that you're doing virtual meetings, more people can come to the ESRC meetings. That's so much easier.
Make it a requirement.
Hey, good morning, Jim. I have Gordon in the waiting room, but for some reason I can't let him in. Would you mind asking him if you could maybe log out and log back in and try to reset?
I'll give him a
But
call.
he may be trying to get into the day 1 link instead of the day 2 link too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay.
I tried that. It didn't work. It didn't work. Nobody told me 20 times to do that,
See, isn't this where you learn from failures?
Well, he's in the waiting room, so
yeah,
I think he's in this meeting.
He's in the waiting room.
Okay, I'll send him a note here.
Okay.
Hold on a second. I gotta
Thanks.
dang Teams up and running. All right, I can just send him a text. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Oh. Here he is.
Sorry, guys, I'm trying on new blue light filtering computer glasses. Trying to see which ones I like.
Are they gonna make your eyes look bluer?
No, but hopefully they won't turn them bloodshot.
Okay, see if that worked. Did he leave?
I think we're going to start with that nanny safe harbor anyway, right?
Yeah. I don't see him in the waiting room anymore, but
Okay.
I'll,
Yeah, I sent him
I'll
a
look
note
out
to try.
for him.
I sent him a note to try and log in again.
Okay.
Okay. Koa, why don't you go ahead and start out with nanny safe harbor. Morning, everybody.
Morning. Actually, Dave, I had some reflections on yesterday. Could I just share those so they could be recorded in the minutes?
Sure.
It'll be brief.
Okay.
So it just has to do with, we're talking about the Uko'a wetland and the adaptive management. So I know that where we left it was they're going to engage with the agencies. I'm assuming that's DOFA and Fish and Wildlife. But maybe one thing that we can be sure that we have in adaptive management things in the future is to make sure that there are clear lines of communication between those who are monitoring the birds and those who are running the traps. Seems like that wasn't, maybe there is some communication, but it isn't formalized in the HCP. And so maybe that's just a learning opportunity for all of us to make sure that in HCPs in the future, it does say that there will be direct and regular communication between those who are monitoring the whatever and the people who are doing the trapping program. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay.
And to follow up on that, Dave, one thing that kind of struck me yesterday was, again, talking on that particular project, is it something that we should have where we have a checklist of what's actually agreed to being done by an HCP and see whether that actually happens, or what's the mechanism for that? Because I do think that one in particular did have, a statement in the HCP that they would do certain things like, assess of whether, do monitoring to see what was going to happen, say at year 5 and that kind of stuff, or annually or things like that. And how do we, or should we even in this body be concerned with whether or not they are doing the things that are in the HCPs? Because in theory, you would pick that up in the reviews, but if the review is not even addressing it, is silent on it, then a lot of times I don't go back necessarily and check the base document. So what's, at some point we should be talking about how that mechanism for seeing whether there is implementation monitoring of the project. The big stuff gets done, but the little stuff may not.
In theory, that should show up in the annual reports, and the staff should be comparing the annual reports relative to the wording of the HCP and highlighting anything in their staff submittals where there's a discrepancy in what they did and what they should have done based on the letter of the HCP.
Yeah,
So
and I thought there was sort of a template for what the annual report would look like, and it could just be emphasized in there that those are things that really need to be pointed out, that need to be addressed.
But I agree, Loyola, we should be able to track that.
Right.
I think that the staff are, but I don't know per project.
Even the Abutulon one, with not getting reports and that kind of stuff, whether or not that's, but anyway, that's maybe a point for another time as to what we want to do with that. But yeah, it is something I just wanted to bring up to us as a group as to whether or how that's an issue with anybody other than me.
Well, and from, it's challenging, I think, because sometimes DOFA is the implementer.
Right.
And sometimes they're the overseer. And I think there needs to be a clear line between that, because the Butylon is a good example of that, and I think some of the Nene projects are similar, and it gets really challenging when DOFA is serving both roles.
Agreed.
Which is why on some of the HCPs where the suggestion has been made for DOFA to be the implementing entity, we've pushed back on that. I've pushed back on that very hard because it is very difficult to maintain the separation between the two. I think with the NANE ones, it's not as bad because usually they're only taking a small portion of it, and it's part of already an established program. But to be the implementing entity, I agree that makes it very difficult for everybody.
Right.
But it's at
Good one.
times reasonable, and like if you like Fish and Wildlife Service, well, it doesn't happen usually with the HCPs by definition, but it does happen with the biological opinions, the Section 7s. For Fish and Wildlife Services, both. And they have to make, and you guys are going to be both at times. So you just have to figure out how to do it. Not that you shouldn't do it, I think, but that you just need to figure out the process. And Fish and Wildlife Service has to firewall, the entities that are doing it versus the people that are doing the biological opinion or Section 7.
Yeah, and we have a similar issue, with research that USGS does, relative to ESRC, HCPs, and things like that.
I think given, so Kavika raised an important question. It sounds like there's really important discussion around this. Is it possible to put it on the end of the day for the agenda if we end, or if we're making good progress and looking like we're going to end early, we can come back to this and give it some more structured thought where we don't have the rest of the agenda hanging over our heads. And if we don't make it on it, we can push it to the next meeting's agenda, maybe at the front of it.
Yeah.
It probably should be pushed to the next meeting because it isn't on the agenda.
Oh, okay,
So
got it.
we should put it on the next agenda and properly agendize it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, sounds good. And with that, Koa, why don't you take it away on the NANE Safe Harbor agreements?
There we are.
I think we just need to do a roll call for the record and for the YouTube first, right? That's okay.
Okay. David Smith, Division of Forestry and Wildlife.
Jim Jacoby, USGS.
Michelle Bogardus, Fish and Wildlife Service.
Melissa Price, UH Manoa.
Boyle Merhoff at large.
Lisa Spain at large.
Gordon Trimble, USGS.
We go into at large.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll start on the Maui Nui Safe Harbor agreements. So let me share screen. Okay, so we have Stephanie Franklin from Maui DOFA branch, who's the NANE biologist there. So she's on the call to answer any questions. I'll kind of just run through the numbers from the report, and if you guys have questions, answer it in detail. So here's just a map of where the 3 Maui Nui Safe Harbor agreements are located. We have Pu'uhoku Ranch on Molokai, the Pi'iholo Ranch on Haleakala, and Haleakala Ranch on South Haleakala. So I'll start with Pu'uhoku Ranch. So there were 74 NANE trails located to the ranch between 2002 and 2005. This pen is a 3-acre open top release pen. So for FY20, 1 fledgling was produced. There were 2 nests in the pen. One was successful that produced that 1 fledgling, and the other one was depredated by a mongoose. There were no gosling deaths. And in total, 44 mongoose were removed. So the population estimate for Pu'uhoku Ranch is 23 NANE, and for FY 2019 it was 27. So,
Question, Koa, and maybe this is for Stephanie. I guess I'm a little bit confused in terms of why there was a depredation inside the pen when there was predator control going on. It just was that not adequate to control the mongoose getting in, or there are holes or breaks in the fence, or?
It's not a predator-proof fence, Jim. It's a ungulate fence, dog fence.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
And that's true for all 3 of these sites, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Okay, so just to fully understand, started with 74, down to 27 in 2019 and down to 23 this year. Is that the basic numbers?
27 is the island-wide population.
Okay, not at this particular site.
Yeah.
And they are being documented island-wide now. I mean, you know, that I think we had that several times in the past.
I mean, there's obviously things going on with Molokai, right? 2019 population was estimated at 27 nene across the island. From what I can tell, pretty much, Stephanie should really speak to this. From what we can tell, the only successful nesting is happening in the very, very few protected areas, Pu'uhoku being one of them.
And so there's no prospect for anybody else signing on to a larger programmatic on this one. I mean, this is just a standalone at this point.
We still have that programmatic in effect. The one from, I can't even remember what year it was, 2007, I think.
1900, I think.
But yeah, no, there's no other signatories on that programmatic.
So just a short indirect question, and maybe Stephanie can speak to this. I don't see her camera on yet, but is this an effective mitigation site?
No, this one isn't a mitigation site. This is a standalone SHA.
Is this operating the way it's supposed to as an agreement?
So I guess just sort of an overarching thing related to these 3 Nene Safe Harbor agreements. It's an awkward safe harbor agreement because in theory, a safe harbor agreement is set up so that a private landowner can do positive things, proactive things for endangered species. The functional part of these safe harbor agreements is that the landowner is allowing DOFA to come onto the property to do the Nene management on their sites. That in and of itself is a benefit, but there's relatively few things that the landowners themselves are obligated to do under those agreements. And Stephanie or Koa, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I actually think that the safe harbor agreement for Pu'uhoku is actually done, but still a right of entry for DOFA to continue to do management on that site. The incidental take license and incidental take permit or enhancement of survival permit associated with the safe harbor agreement is still in effect for a longer period of time.
Okay, so our role today, if I could receive clarification on this, it would be very helpful, is to evaluate whether the take is appropriate. What is our role in this if the safe harbor agreement has actually ended?
First of all, Koa or Stephanie, can you confirm my understanding that the agreement is done, but the take license remains in effect and DOFA continues to have a right of entry to do this work on the property?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So in reality, our role is probably just looking at whether or not the landowner is continuing to hold up their end of the bargain associated with the safe harbor agreement and incidental take license.
And can I ask, Michelle, what was the baseline on Pu'uhoku Ranch? 0?
0.
I don't.
0.
It was
0.
0.
And I think that's actually true for all 3 of the sites, but I could be.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's correct. I think it's 0 across the board.
Yeah, I think the other thing, our role too is to look at what has happened there, particularly the negative side of things when birds are taken, and this will come up with the Umikoa because it's potential that a safe harbor agreement site may end up by improper management of the area become a sink. It provides habitat that's attractive. Birds come into that site and just get whacked by predators if it's not adequately controlled and so forth. So I think that's the other thing we're looking at too in terms of whether we're not putting a negative on a larger population through these sites.
And then, as I understand it, PE Holo is a mitigation site for KWP. So how does the mitigation numbers work within a safe harbor agreement if your baseline is 0?
That is a very good question. It's one that we're going to talk about with PE Holo, I imagine, and Haleakala
And
Ranch.
Haleakala Ranch, right? Exactly, both.
So for this,
Now, Puahoku is not a mitigation site for any project. It is solely a safe harbor agreement. The safe harbor agreement itself, the agreement part of it has expired, but there continues to be management on the site under a right of entry agreement. Their take license goes out further than the agreement did.
so the responsibility of the landowner is simply to provide access. They are providing access. They're holding up their end of the bargain. Any of the management, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is the responsibility of DOFA to provide the predator removal. And so it's a question in regards to what's adequate predator removal to make this a successful arrangement. Am I framing that correctly, or can you provide some correction?
I would prefer DOFA respond to that one, because I think that at this point it's a recovery. What DOFA is continuing to do is a recovery action rather than a requirement under the agreement.
Yeah, so with us working with Puahoku Ranch, they give us the access to the ranch itself so we can get up to the open top release pen. They also do some habitat management where they are actively mowing and producing short grass pasture land for the birds as well. But then as far as any of like the nene management, the hands-on, like, you know, sighting, banding, nesting, predator trapping, you know, habitat management, like in and around the pen, and any maintenance activities up there, that all falls under the DOFA staff.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So I'm sorry, I'm still not clear on what's our job today in regards to this as ESRC?
Yeah. Is this just a report out, or what are we doing here?
Koa, do you have any other slides on this?
For Puahoku Ranch, this is the only one, but I have PE Holo and Haleakala Ranch coming up.
Okay. My question would be to Stephanie. Stephanie, is there anything in the safe harbor agreement that the landowner has long-term responsibilities to do that you feel like that is not happening the way that it should? For the landowner responsibilities.
No, I think that they're meeting like their expectations that, you know, were reached there. I mean, it's kind of like what you said, right? Like, so that agreement is expired and no longer, you know, running. However, we do still have, you know, access, you know, to go and monitor the ranch, and then they still have the take license that's there. But I feel like as far as DOFA goes with the ranch, we have like a very beneficial relationship. They enjoy the nene and definitely want to see the population increase, and, you know, are willing to help out, you know, however they can. So I think as far as just the landowner side, you know, goes, they definitely are within their bounds.
Melissa, to more formally answer your question, I see our role as evaluating whether or not the landowner has met their responsibilities to retain their take license.
Mhm.
There is a bigger question on the table, and we know that there are issues on Molokai. There's questions about what is the future of nene on the island, and how does Puahoku fit into that, and how do we as agencies work together to encourage recovery of nene on those islands, but that's outside the scope of the safe harbor agreement.
Yep, agreed.
Stephanie, one more question for you. I know in the past we've talked about actually creating a new agreement or a renewed agreement with Puahoku to reinstitute the actual agreement part of the safe harbor rather than just the take license. But my understanding is that they were thinking about selling the ranch, and there was erosion issues and a bunch of other things that were holding us back from doing that. Is that still the situation, or is there anything that potentially, has the status changed?
Not really. I mean, I think, you know, with having like the incidental take license, like, we're pretty much going along as like business as usual. And even without having the safe harbors like in play, they are indeed still continuing, to do habitat management, through their mowing and stuff. So, I mean, I think it's pretty much the same as it's been. I know that the selling, portion that you're talking about is more in play with P Holo Ranch than with this one.
I have a hard time keeping some of the details from the 3 different projects separate, so I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Any more questions on Pu'uhoku?
Sorry, I know they have a take license in place. Without a safe harbor in place, they have 23 endangered nene on their property. The security of the safe harbor and the baseline being 0 is now not in effect for them. So they are legally now harboring 23 birds that they are obligated to protect. Is that a statement that would be correct if there's no safe harbor in place anymore? Even though DOFA translocated them there in the first place?
I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I don't know, I'm going to stumble over my words, but under the agreement, they were obligated to do certain things to promote the recovery of the species in conjunction with DOFA. Like Stephanie said, DOFA held the responsibility for installing and maintaining the pen and all of the hands-on management and resighting of the birds, but the landowner did sign on for doing things like mowing, habitat management outside of the pen, not having dogs on the ranch. I can't remember the exact wording, but there's a list of things in the original agreement that they're obligated to do. The agreement, I think, lasted for, Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, was that a 10-year agreement or a 20-year agreement? 10-year, right? Either way, the agreement lasted for a certain period of time, but the take license itself went for a longer period of time than the agreement did. During this time period between when the agreement ends and when the license ends, they are allowed to continue doing ranch activities, and those ranch activities have the potential for having inadvertent, very low levels of take associated with those operations. Things like mowing or basic ranch activities, disturbance. It's not intended to result in the mortality of the birds that are there, but it could result in disturbance that would potentially reduce reproductive success on other areas of the ranch, right? Those kind of things. So I would not say that they are obligated to ensure that these birds are fully protected during this time period, but they are obligated to ensure that they hold up the actions that they agreed to under the agreement for the time of period of the agreement. And it sounds like they are voluntarily continuing those actions after the end of the agreement during this time that DOFA continues to have the right of entry to do this work.
But technically, aren't they able to, I shouldn't say allowed to, able to, through incidental take, the population could go down to baseline conditions? Certainly when the SHA is in effect, but I'm not sure what happens after it's over.
So they can't result in directed take of name.
No, not directed, but indirected.
Right. What they can do is they can take the habitat back to baseline conditions. They can't take the number of individuals back down to baseline conditions. There is a provision in each of these safe harbor agreements that says that if they want they have the option of telling DOFA, we don't want birds on our property anymore, but they have to inform DOFA of that a certain period of time before that happens. And then DOFA would have to go on and actually capture the birds and move them or come up with some sort of plan. It's sort of a generalized statement in each of the agreements. Obviously, we haven't gotten to that point yet for any of these projects, and we certainly hope that we never do, but they can't reduce the baseline number of individuals without coordinating that with the agencies. What they can do is they can take the habitat back down to baseline conditions.
So obviously, this is the kind of agreement with private landowners in the state of Hawaii that we want to see keep happening, right? We need to recover populations. We need more space in a lot of cases. And Nene in particular have some potential agriculture conflicts. And so working with agricultural landowners for expanding populations is fantastic. I know in talking with people, they're afraid to have endangered species on the property or to notify people that there are, because they're afraid their activities will be restricted. So this kind of thing where they're working with us, we want to see this happen. How do we behave in this situation that it continues to encourage this kind of agreement? Do we need to extend the safe harbor agreement? What do we need to do to keep a positive relationship going here?
In this case, there's a great and positive relationship between DOFA and the landowner, which is awesome to hear, Stephanie. And it's even more awesome to hear that the landowner is voluntarily continuing to do those positive actions that they were doing under the agreement that is now expired. Those are all good things. Melissa, I couldn't agree with you more. We can't recover endangered species solely on federal and state land. We need private landowners to not just be willing to do these kind of agreements, but that are engaged in the discussion of endangered species recovery across the islands. You know, when we did Kamehameha School's Safe Harbor Agreement, it was an opportunity for us to look at how do we do that in a positive and productive way. And I think that, at least for me, and I think for some of the rest of us, that agreement highlighted all of the good things that we can achieve with private landowners through safe harbor agreements. But I also think that safe harbor agreements aren't the only way that we can encourage endangered species recovery on private lands. There are other mechanisms as well, and those are things that we should be looking at. But it is a tool, and it is a positive tool. I'd say that the Nene safe harbors are complicated because it has relatively few obligations of the landowner themselves, and it puts DOFA in a situation where they are having to do the hardcore management actions. And so there are potentially other mechanisms that could support that kind of structure in the future. And then, as we're going to talk about with Pi'iholo and Haleakala Ranch, overlaying mitigation on top of that makes it a little bit more cumbersome and complicated. But there is a lot of room for more proactive conservation of endangered species on private land, and the agencies, at least, and probably ESRC, can be looking at a variety of tools to encourage that.
So bringing it back to the decision making for today, or the recommendations that ESRC is going to make, we have a pioneering agreement here. And everyone scrutinizes and pays attention to the pioneers because they're the first. And so we want to make sure that not only in practice, but also in perception, this is a positive thing. So what kinds of things do you need from us as ESRC? And not you, I don't know if it's you, Michelle, I don't know if it's Stephanie, I'm not sure who the guiding decision makers are in this particular situation. What do you need from us in regards to making sure this continues to be a positive thing moving forward, or recommendations from us, or what? Sorry, I'm still struggling. What do you need from us today?
Well, if I could just jump in, I mean, there was an attempt to do a programmatic for Molokai, still just talking about Molokai, a programmatic safe harbor for Molokai, for Nene particularly, and to be able to have other landowners, sign in on a similar kind of agreement. And this was the pioneering one. And then that programmatic was hopefully an umbrella that many other landowners would come under. We built it and nobody came. And I'm not sure exactly why, but again, this one has been relatively successful. I mean, it's something where there were no Nene on Molokai, and now there are, albeit, with quite a bit of effort by DOFA. So it's not clear in terms of, what else we can do to encourage that, or who should be doing it. It's not an ESRC job. It really is more, I think, the agency.
Well, why don't we just circle back with the agencies and we'll try to figure out where we're at with this. Like, we don't want to be punitive because, they had a safe harbor and now it expired. So now all of a sudden their baseline's 23, that seems punitive. So we need to figure this out. So why don't we just circle back with the agencies? I don't think we need anything from the ESRC at the moment. It doesn't sound like we're at that point.
I think that DOFA and the landowner should be commended for doing this, not even remotely penalized. It hasn't had the success I would have kind of hoped for.
Right.
But but these are all going to be experimental to some extent, right? Anytime you're doing a reintroduction and trying to get the management, it's tough management. So I actually give kudos to DOFA and the landowner. And I mean, I would even, think that you would want to make sure that you made sure that, the landowner, as long as they're not actively doing anything bad, you even look at extending the incidental take license and things like that to make sure that they're covered as long as they're doing, kind of good neighbor kind of stuff. And anyway, that's just my point on it. But yeah, circling back sounds good, but I don't know what you would be really wanting to expect from a landowner than what they've done.
I would agree, Loyal. I mean, I think that there's a lot of good voluntary actions on behalf of the landowner here. And the fact that DOFA is continuing to do this management even beyond the end of the agreement it's to be commended.
And it could be that this isn't going to work. There's just too much predator, but much predation. But regardless, this is kind of what we hope people step up and do, and that DOFA steps up and does, and they should get commended for it.
The take license, by the way, I think goes out 50 years, so they're covered for a good long while.
Good.
That's good to hear. And
Good, thank you.
So from I think an ESRC perspective, I would say that encouraging the agencies to ensure that agreements and everything don't lapse and that this activity can continue, so that should there ever be a time where there's something that changes in personnel at who's the head of the ranch or whatever, that there isn't this moment of there's no agreement left on the table and it puts it into this legal realm that might change circumstances. So encouraging, so the take license, knowing that that's 50 years is a good thing. But it would be really nice to have them protected by a safe harbor as well.
Hi, this is Afshin. I just want to clarify the safe harbor incidental take licenses on the state side is good unless rescinded. So essentially it's good forever almost. And then on the federal side, it's 99 years. So that's also a really long time. So I think the idea was always we wanted to introduce the species to Molokai and we want to protect the landowner. So we did this long-term incidental take license and permit with them.
Thanks, Afshin.
And does that mean that and then how does that relate to the SHA expiring? They still have a baseline of 0?
I mean, I think we're operating as if the safe harbor was in place. I mean, everything that was in place with the safe harbor, we're kind of following that. I'd have to look exactly at the incidental take license language on that.
Okay.
But, we have talked to the landowner. Puahoku Ranch was interested in extending that safe harbor agreement. And we've had a lot of conversations with them, but it's been a little while. And I'd say probably something we haven't prioritized on our end, mainly because of our staff shortages. But it's something we do want to work with the landowner to have some, I think they're still interested in extending their safe harbor. And originally, back in 2008, when it expired, they did send a letter to DLNR requesting extension. And we had a lot of conversations. They wanted to see certain changes with the pen in terms of vegetation management. They wanted, more trees planted. I don't know, we were in negotiation with them and it went back and forth, but it was never something that was ever finalized. So I think they're interested still, but it's a conversation we haven't had in a while.
Okay. So we'll just need to circle back on that and make sure that they're covered, and we can talk to our AG's office as well and make sure that we have proper legal coverage, because we don't want to lure somebody into an agreement with an SHA, and then when you get to the end of it and it expires, all of a sudden your number gets recalibrated at the higher number. So we need to work on making sure that isn't the case.
But I think the other issue too is, and we did talk about this early on with ESRC when this was being discussed, is if this is a very successful site and a lot of productivity is here, I mean, obviously they're not going to be just simply staying on this site, they're going to be spreading to other parts of the island, if not other islands. But as they spread to other parts of the island, then what happens in those areas? And that's again why the programmatic was put together. And I think that still is a concern because these birds obviously are not just staying here on Puhoku Ranch, where there is predator control and so forth. And the adult birds are less at risk certainly than nesting and goslings. But if nesting occurs elsewhere, then there's risk there. So I think that's something we need to think about in terms of seeding a program like this that leads to the productivity and potentially puts birds at risk elsewhere.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, great. I'll continue on with the P.E. Holo Ranch. So P.E. Holo Ranch is the mitigation site for KWP2. So there are 48 nene translocated to the ranch between 2005 and 2008, and this is a 1 acre open top release pen. In FY20, we had 2 fledglings produced. There are 15 nests or nesting attempts. 5 of the nests were successful and they produced 8 goslings. 6 goslings died, 3 from unknown causes and 3 from inclement weather. Predator trapping removed 53 mongoose, 7 rats, 2 mice, and the population estimate for FY20 was 27. And that's down from the FY 2019 estimate of 37 nene. Great.
And that's the entire island number?
No, that's for the
Just
pen.
for the pen is 27.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's gone from 48 to 27 since they were translocated? Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that largely due to them going elsewhere, not preferring that particular habitat? Obviously, they're not constrained to that space.
I think Stephanie can speak to that better.
Hi, this is Stephanie again. So actually that population estimate for 2020 should be 31 nene for the pen. So these are specific estimates for the individual pens. So we do know that the birds are traveling pretty much like island wide. So we have island wide sightings, and whenever we submit like our Maui population estimates, it's for the entire island. These are just dealing with the individual birds that we see within the pen, even though they could be seen, in other places across the island as well.
And then likewise, birds from elsewhere are coming to P.E. Holo occasionally too. Is that correct, Stephanie?
Yes, that's correct as well. We actually have been some Haleakala National Park birds.
Oops, we're losing your voice.
Yes, they're coming down from there, and then we get crossover between Central Maui and
Yeah, we've lost your audio, Stephanie.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Okay.
Yeah, just get close to your mic.
Yeah, there's some construction going on at my apartment complex, so I think that's kind of hindering the audio as well.
So maybe the short question is this serving its purpose?
Well, I guess in one sense, I mean, it seems like 2 goslings were successful. And so that's a positive of 2 relative to the HCP.
But so we went from 48 initially to 30, and the question I think that Melissa was asking is, I had the same question: is what happened to the other ones? Did they fly off somewhere else or potentially healthy and reproducing, or did they die in on the ranch?
This is Stephanie again. I'm hoping you guys can hear me. I'm trying to
That's
cut
better.
background from the construction that's going on here. But yeah, what we're kind of looking at is, again, like they're more spread out across the island. You can't specifically say, you know, that all of these 48 nene that were translocated to the ranch, and we're down to the 31 now, have, a mortality rate because these things are happening, on the ranch. I think it's easier now to kind of, look at the whole population estimate for the entire island of Maui. But it's also hard whenever you're dealing with, like these mitigation projects and then these safe harbors, because we're specifically, focusing in on these individual sites. But yeah, I think this one's, kind of, similar to like all of the ones that we're going to be talking about today. I mean, there's definite, benefits that are coming out with them. We have really good relationships again with the ranches that are involved, here on Maui too. And it's kind of the same management, practices, like, the state is kind of, heading up, the projects. A little bit different though for the Piholo one and then the Haleakala Ranch one that we'll talk about next, is because they are mitigation sites as well. We have RCOH staff that specifically works at these projects.
So to take it back to the numbers that matter, there's a whole lot of numbers on this slide. To me, the one number that matters is that only 2 fledglings were produced out of 15 nests. And I don't mean that as a criticism at all on anyone doing the management, but just that those numbers from a recovery perspective don't really get us there when 27 nene result in 2 fledglings produced. There's a predation problem. So to me, there's 2 things. One is this site serving its purpose. As ESRC, we can provide some feedback on that if needed. But secondly, more broadly, is this an island-wide issue, or is this a site issue with this really low reproductive output? And again, not meant as a criticism, but just a concern that like these reproduction numbers, these are geese. These numbers are not great. These tell me we've got a major mongoose or cat problem going on or something.
Well, you got 8 goslings, 2 successful, 25%, and 6, 3 are unknown and 3 were weather. So yeah, it's highly likely that, predation could be an issue, but obviously half of the goslings, or apparently half of the goslings, died of inclement weather too. So it's, it's complicated.
Yeah, that's still 3 goslings out of 27 potential parents. I mean, half that for pairs.
15 nests with 8 goslings. So yeah.
So again, I think we should look at, for the time being, or being clear on how we're looking at the safe harbor versus the HCP portion of this and how those interact. So again, I give credit to the landowner and DOFA for agreeing to work on getting nene at this site. So I think that's good. Whether it's cost efficient from a DOFA perspective, what they may have to do in that is another question. But again, sounds like they probably have done things. One thing I would say though is when you're going to couple the safe harbor agreement with an HCP, I personally think, for discussion I guess later or whatever, or for future ones, if not this one, that when you're going to put a mitigation on top of a safe harbor, the safe harbor baseline needs to increase to mirror what is required by the mitigation, whether it's an HCP, a section 7, whatever that is, that needs to then bounce up for the duration of whatever it is the mitigation requires. If it's in perpetuity, then it's in perpetuity. But that's not the same as looking at whether this safe harbor is meeting its needs. We'd have to go through and ask the same questions of Stephanie. How well is the landowner working? Are they, not a part of the problem, but a part of being a good neighbor kind of thing.
I have a bigger picture request maybe that I think I'm seeing in these last two, and I think it would actually help us overall. It'd be super useful when we're reviewing each of these. Obviously, we do this once a year for 2 days, but I think in each of our things, if we start off with a slide that just says, here's the expectations for review, here's what we're trying to decide or not decide, we can certainly have more broad discussion on things. But I guess I just need to know what's being asked of us from a decision perspective of like, what are the goals and what are the evaluation criteria? It'd be nice to just have those laid out so that we can have a more directed discussion.
I think it's just it's supposed to be just an info session. So I think, just the value here, we're just looking at safe harbors generally, and they are valuable because they allow us to go in and do management on private properties. So that's a good thing. To Melissa's point, it points out that how difficult it is to manage Nene. We're not really being wildly successful anywhere with Nene management. And so, it's a very difficult thing, and we just need to keep these tools in place so we can keep working on it and try to figure it out and get better success, breeding success with the birds. But I think what it does point out is these SHAs are valuable tools to allow us to get, to allow private landowners to participate. And to Jim's point and to Michelle's point, we can't do this on government land alone. We're going to need private to help, and we don't want to be punitive on them for jumping in. And also to Jim's point, the importance of the programmatic, so that if we're successful and birds spill out, that other landowners don't get penalized.
Yeah. So. And I think we did talk about this with KHP yesterday. From the HCP point of view for this one, the only number that really counts is 2. +2. That's what was produced, and that's what they can tally against what was the tape. But I think the other issue is, and we'll see this as we get down to one of the other ones here soon, is in both this case and Pu'uhoku, there is a good relationship with DOFA and the landowner, and DOFA is doing the management. In the case of one that we'll talk about in a few minutes, that's not the case, and that is a different situation altogether. And that's where the concern has come up for several years on that project, which we'll get to, in terms of that being potentially really a sink and not a good situation. But in this case, I think, again, since, as Loyola said, this is a good relationship, let's keep it going, learn from what it is and try and see whether we can, increase productivity in sites like this. Where the birds go, though, is a big issue.
Great. Yeah, so I'll finish up the presentation and then we can talk about the last one. So the next safe harbor is Haleakala Ranch on Maui. So there are 4 adult nene, 3 goslings translocated from Kauai, 1 nene translocated to the ranch from Molokai. And this is a 2-acre open top release pen. So for FY20, 10 fledglings were produced. There are 2 gosling deaths, predator trapping, 6 mongoose and 1 mouse removed. And there is a total population estimate of 57 nene in the pen, and that's up from 47 nene in FY19. Great. All right. Cool. So the last is Umikoa Ranch. So this is a 20-year safe harbor agreement that expires at the end of this calendar year. The safe harbor was for an ITL coverage of nene and koloa that was attracted to ponds on the property. So our agenda item today is to vote to rescind the Umikoa Ranch Protected Wildlife Permit. So we haven't been in contact with the landowner for roughly 10 years. We haven't received a report. We've been in contact, I think, right, with the manager. So on the state side, the ITO runs with the land. So Glenn Metzler was able to reach out to the new landowner. The Umikoa was sold to the Abju Corporation based out of Japan. The agent, we got into contact with the agent with this corporation, but the agent was not able to get in contact with the owner of the land. So we still have had no response from them. So I know in the last ESRC meeting, you guys requested a voting item to rescind this ITL. So yeah, that's what we plan to do today.
And to be clear, on the federal side, we have the agreement follows the landowner, not the land. So we have the agreement is now ended on the federal side. There is no active safe harbor agreement on this site following the sale of the property.
And just a bit of history. This one actually did start off in the right direction. It was initiated not by DOFA, but by Ducks Unlimited. And they had an active program here at the time. And this seemed like it was a good situation again, that DU was going to be handling the management and basically, you know, very similar to both Piholo and Haleakala Ranch and Puuhoku. But that evaporated very, very quickly as DU left the islands, and then all those obligations fell down to the landowner. And you know, we have not really had any, you know, meaningful report from them for many, many years. There's a suggestion that the fences are not being maintained around the ponds. Predator trapping is not continuing, or at least we have no evidence that it has been, and so forth. And so the real concern comes up in a site like this, where this is a bad situation, where there is an attractive nuisance and you know, it could be a real sink for the population. I think that's where the real concern has come in. So it's a very different one from the other ones in terms of the management follow through.
Okay, so well, you need a vote. Is that it to rescind? And I'm not sure the authority exactly of the ESRC to rescind. Like, who would actually rescind the ITL? Is that something that?
So it's a recommendation to the BLNR to rescind the ITL. So this would be included in the package that would be given to the board. The ESRC recommendation will be in the package. So,
but as far as we know, there are no birds on site. Is that correct? So I'm just, you know, what difference is it going to make one way or the other? Not that I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying is where does it stand in terms of what's
so part of the reason why on the federal side we did formalize the fact that this agreement is done is because, similar to the Nene safe harbor agreements, the agreement ends at the end of this calendar year, but the incidental take license, or the incidental take license extends for a longer period of time. So functionally, we want to make sure that this is done, because unless we want that take license to stand long term.
So it's not just simply recommending the end to the safe harbor. That has to trigger also the ITL.
Koa should answer that. Yes.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So I mean, if the board you know, takes our recommendation and decides to end the SHA before it's completed at the end of this year, how does that really relate to the ITL in terms of, you know, is there a change to the ITL?
They should rescind both.
And when you read the agenda, that's what it asks us to do, right? Is to vote to recommend to rescind the safe harbor and the protected wildlife permit.
I'm uncomfortable doing that. I have not, I mean, this safe harbor is not up on the website for me to go back and look at. And I don't think I have a copy of it from DOFA.
So can we get a motion to rescind, and then we can discuss and vote on it? Is anybody comfortable with that?
If I can just add one thing regarding the birds utilizing this area. From the surveys that we've done, you know, I think the ranch had seen Nene maybe a couple of times at the ranch, and there might have been Kaloa a couple of times, but in the surveys that we've done biannually, we haven't seen birds utilizing the area. So it's not a site that seems to be any way important for these two species. Just wanted to add that.
And Afshin, can you confirm there's never been any translocations of either of the covered species to this site?
That's correct.
Yeah, so records are that there's minimal to no utilization other than just what might be happening incidentally with these water sites. It's a pretty marginal site. It's high elevation.
I mean, it did have potential. I mean, there's similar very positive, efforts going on at Hakalo National Wildlife Refuge, where they actually are very successful there. And so, it was intended to be, meshing in with those kinds of efforts too. But again, there's been no follow through.
Yeah. Well, when DU dropped out of the state, basically, that was pretty much the end of it. I think it was Kim Uehara was the lead. That's when Andy Inglis was still with DU in California, I believe, and or Western region. And
yeah, and it continued on, somewhat in a positive way as long as Dave Matsuura was the manager there. But then when that changed, that's when everything went completely down.
Yeah. Okay, what do you guys think? Do we move to rescind, or do we want to think about it more? Defer it?
Well, as I said, Dave, I'm uncomfortable not actually seeing the SHA, and maybe you sent it to me and I just didn't find it. So if that's the case, then I'm at fault there. But what specifically did they fail to do?
Well, there's no management and there's no contact, and the current landowner isn't even aware of the agreement.
And we have not had any reports, from the land. DOFA has sketched together a report occasionally, but they haven't been directly involved in it. DOFA and Fish and Wildlife, but there's been no real reporting from the landowner at all on this, as far as I know.
And that's required in the safe harbor agreement?
I believe so. Isn't there an annual report requirement?
That's my question.
Yeah, there is, and there's I think there's 5 ponds, I want to say 5 or 7 ponds at the ranch that they are to keep fenced and managed, and those are the types of things that weren't being maintained under the safe harbor agreement, which was supposed to be maintained. And there was some level of predator control that was supposed to occur, which wasn't occurring. There was a little bit in terms of, they would control any wild dogs that they would see on their ranch and things like that, but there was no real active predator control. And that was something, so under this safe harbor agreement, the ranch had a little bit more responsibility than the other NENE agreements we have, where DOFA took a lot of that responsibility. So this one, the landowner was supposed to do a lot of that, and they weren't actively managing it to the level the agreement required.
So let me add in here that, and this might be helpful to you, Loyal. For under 195D-22, the board may suspend or rescind any safe harbor agreement if the board determines that they have breached their obligations and have failed to cure the breach in a timely manner, and the effect of the breach is to diminish the likelihood that the agreement will achieve its goals within the timeframes or the manner set forth in the agreement. So, basically that's the finding the SRC has to make. Basically, that this breach, this failure to take the action that they're supposed to take will diminish the likelihood that the agreement will achieve its goals.
And that sounds great, Linda. What I would prefer would be to have that actually stated with what's in the SHA and then why that has not been met, rather than just saying, well, this is what we remember about it, but to have that actually spelled out from DOFA and then move forward on it when we have that.
Yeah, I'm just stating that in finding a breach and terminating the agreement, and that's the type of finding that needs to be made.
Yeah, so I'd be comfortable if that's enumerated and documented so that we can then make that decision, or I can make that decision, sorry, that recommendation.
Okay, so do we want to defer to the next meeting and then we'll come back, DOFA will come back with a more enumerated recommendation?
That'd be my preference.
Okay. You want
Yeah, and that'd be fine for me. And one of the things, from USGS perspective is we want to make sure that the recommendation, if we send a recommendation and we vote on it, if we send a recommendation to the board that we vote on, is that it really is, it's focusing on biological issues. I mean, the concerns we have are biological. It's not a compliance issue. We have we've got to make sure that USGS does not have a voice in the compliance part of it. It's the biological part that triggers that compliance concern.
So, the requirement that they find that it would, the breach would diminish the likelihood that the agreement will achieve its goals is in fact, I would think, biologically based, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's two pieces. There's that, but there's also the compliance issue.
Right.
Yep.
And Jim in USGS may not be as interested in that part, but I would say from a ESRC perspective, that would be one of the things that I would be interested in addition to the biological.
True.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, that's one of the bases. A second basis would be that the funding is no longer there, or that the permitted activity would appreciably reduce the likelihood of survival or recovery. The thing is with the baseline of basically no nene and only 2 koloa that were ever found there, the bar is pretty low, but I think it would be better if it could be enunciated in a separate submittal as far as what the requirements are to suspend or terminate the agreement and whether or not it's been met.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important parts too, is as new issues similar to this come up with new proposals, that we know how to make sure we write it in a way that can ensure that we're not going to have the same problem again.
I'm fine with it being further enumerated at the next meeting, but we're gonna have a hard time explaining why the lack of the actions is going to result in a reduced likelihood of survival or recovery of the species because they're not there. And part of the reason why they're not there is because the management that was identified in the Safe Harbor Agreement hasn't been happening. It hasn't been happening for a while. So I guess Loyal's right. There's a biological issue and there's a compliance issue. The new landowner doesn't even know that this fully exists or has any intention of implementing the actions under the agreement.
Yeah, nor have they committed to any of the funding, which is another, basis for terminating the agreement.
Yeah, but I thought also one of the stipulations in the SHA was that there were surveys done to document what was there, and if you close your eyes, you don't know what was there or what wasn't there. We can't just assume that there was nothing there that wasn't taken because of aforementioned.
Well, sorry, Michelle, go.
Sorry.
So, I mean, based on the report, it looks like they did do a survey in 2019. Even when they did the survey, when it was initially started, the baseline for nene was 0. And the only species they saw were koloa, and there were only 2 of them. So, again, it was a fairly low bar to start with.
Sure.
Yeah,
Again, all good points. Just enumerate them so that we know that's exactly what's in the safe harbor. This is what they are not complying with, even if it's reporting. That's acceptable. To enumerate it's a problem. It's not just articulated well enough for me.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Okay, so do we need a vote to defer, or just by not having a motion to vote on it, we can just move on? Linda,
probably be better to have a motion or a vote to defer. Yeah.
So do I have a move to defer? And what we'll do is we'll have the agencies go back and calibrate with each other and then come back at the next meeting and have a clearly defined proposed motion.
Good.
So do I have a motion to defer?
I'll move that.
Okay, second.
Loyal. Do that.
What's the first? Who's the second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Jim second, and all in favor? Say aye.
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 Any opposed?
There you go. Aye.
Jim, you said aye, right? You're not.
Yes, I
opposed?
said aye. I was just trying to get my hand in the thing saying yes.
Okay, so I'm saying a unanimous ayes unless there is a either a oppose or what's the other guy? Is that it? Everybody unanimous? We're good? Okay. Okay, unanimous. Thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and do the Community Schools SHA.
Dave.
So it's 10:12 according to my watch. We'll come back at 10:17.
Dave, I
Yep.
do have a couple of follow-up questions on Haleakala and Pi'i Holo. I'm so sorry. Do you want to do those now or do you want to do those after we come back?
Yeah, okay, let's do them.
Okay, I promise that they'll be quick. Stephanie, I don't know if you're still on the phone, but just going back to those two really quickly, my understanding is that Pi'i Holo is in the same spot as Puahoku where the agreement is ended, but the take license is still in effect. So ultimately, my only question is, it seems like there's a good relationship there. Is there anything that has there been any take of birds at the ranch associated with ranch activities? Or do you have any other concerns related to that?
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, so you are correct. It's the same, kind of issue that we spoke about with Puhoku. And again, we definitely do have a very, very good relationship with that ranch as well. However, it's kind of in a different scenario. This is the ranch that is up for sale. So I mean, it's been on the market forever. It's at a very, very steep price. So, who knows what the, future holds with that. But, where we're at, with the landowner currently, it's going very well. They haven't had any, take on their side due to the ranching activities that are out there. So I do think, kind of it is, beneficial. A little bit, different from some of the other ranches. That's probably the one pen and one ranch that gets like probably the most inclement weather. So you saw on Koa's screen, on his PowerPoint that, a lot of the goslings were lost through the weather conditions that are out there. Those are all things, that are out of everybody's hands. I think that's probably going to be what we'll see from this year as well. Those super heavy rains that we just got last week pretty much flooded a lot of that ranch, and the weather and the temperatures got really, really low. So we did already lose like some nests, for this season as well out there. But as far as like the ranch itself goes, I think we're on really good, terms. But just to put that caveat out there that it is actually, listed for sale, the future could be a little uncertain with this one.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. And then 2 questions on Haleakala Ranch. Haleakala Ranch is different than the others because it does have an active agreement and the landowner has obligations under that agreement to do certain things. Are you feel confident that they are fully implementing all of the actions that they are required to do under that agreement?
Yes, I do. Again, another really good relationship that we have with that ranch as well. We work directly with the ranch manager that is out there. They've also been in conversation with us, with the potential of, expanding that pen and stuff. But yeah, again, they're doing what's expected of them. And definitely, help us as well, kind of voluntarily outside of their, scope, whenever we need it also. So again, another good, kind of beneficial relationship out there.
That's great to hear. And I know that that was a hard fought new agreement for all of us, including the ranch, to try and work through all those details. I'm really happy to hear that it's going well. One last question. I see on here the one gosling death in the water trough, is there any adaptive management that's needed related to the water troughs, and has that been done yet?
Yeah, good, good for seeing that and pointing that out. Yeah, this one was kind of a weird scenario. All of our water troughs, have that meshing and ramps that are placed into it, just for this reason, so goslings, can, get out. This gosling kind of had some health issues before, the drowning. We suspected that it was purely blind in one of its eyes. So it was already kind of having some issues just genetically, which I think kind of led to this as well. But yeah, we went ahead and replaced all of the ramps that are in there, put longer meshing, to the bottom of it, and added actually another one just in case. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of the first time that has happened. And, hopefully it will be the last. But yeah, we went ahead and did, add a few more things, just on our side, to hopefully mitigate that issue. But I think, some of this was just like the biology and genetics and the health of this individual gosling too.
Those were all of my questions, Stephanie. Thank you again for all of your hard work and your tech's hard work for all 3 of these sites. And please pass our thanks on to the landowners as well for their hard work in making these agreements happen.
Yes, definitely. Thank you guys so much. Like, we appreciate all of your support, and it's always interesting and beneficial to get, other feedback and, have those questions come up that, we haven't always, thought about. So it's a good conversation to have, moving forward with all of these.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Really appreciate all your efforts out there, and you guys are doing great work and, trying to figure this out. It's obviously, Nene are very difficult to manage on the landscape, especially with all the challenges with predators and whatnot. So great work, and continue on. Okay, any other questions on these items here? Okay, we'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I'm looking at coming back at 10:23. I apologize to the other presenters for pushing things back a little bit, but we'll try to get back on time here. And we got a little bit of flex with the lunch hour. So, okay, 5-minute break. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry for pushing it further.
Okay. Okay. Hey, how's it? We're back. Okay, Cole, you back on?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, are we ready? Do we have, is Namaka going to be the lead here for K Community Schools, SHA?
Yeah, Namaka's here. So Namaka, when you're ready, you can start sharing screen and proceed with the presentation. Namaka, you ready?
Namaka doesn't seem to be here yet.
Okay.
She's
Wait a little bit.
muted or something.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah,
I'm on my phone, so
okay.
I had my phone unmuted and I did not have Zoom unmuted. There's my video, and how do I share? Can I just share my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, you should be able to. Your co-host
Okay.
now, so.
Okay. Can you guys see that?
Can.
Okay. Oh, it's not showing but it's not showing as the
If you go to
Tuesday.
your PowerPoint presentation, just click on the presentation, then it should go maybe the upper left-hand corner.
Under
Namaka.
file, right under the red file thing. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. It wasn't working for a second. It
There it
could be
goes.
the bandwidth on my computer. Also, I might have to turn off my video, but I'll try leaving it on for a bit. Okay. So aloha everyone. Mahalo for having us. This is our second annual report. The first one that I'm giving. Millie gave our report last year, and there's a lot to cover. So I'm excited to kind of see what you guys are the most interested in hearing about, so that we can tailor future reports to be more in line with what you guys are interested in. I also want to apologize before we start that the paper report that you guys have is a draft that we submitted, and there's a number of typos in it. We are working on a final report minus those typos that we'll get in the next week or so. Okay. So Kamehameha Schools, we're a private landed educational trust established by the will of Bernice Pauahi Bishop. Our mission is to improve the capability and well-being of people of Hawaiian ancestry. And we have vast land holdings across the Hawaiian Islands, including about 363,000 acres of land. And that includes this area here, Keoho Ka'u. It's in the district of Ka'u, borders North and South Hilo, as well as Puna. And this particular safe harbor agreement is for 32,000 acres of land here at Keoho. It includes young lava flow, native shrublands, native forest, a lot of former pasture that's in recovery, as well as an active winery and some small active pasture leases. The agreement has a 50-year term, and it covers 33 rare species. There's 25 plant species, 8 wildlife species. For the plant species, only 9 of them are currently found on the property. There's 3 special concern species whose total numbers on and off KS property were so low that there's some special considerations, special avoidance and minimization measures that were adopted for these. there's 6 other covered plant species present on the property, and then there's 16 other species covered by the agreement that aren't on the property, but that we do intend to plant in the future. So we'll go through some of our actions from this year, and I'll go through them kind of quickly, but feel free to ask questions, during or after. And then in each of these, in that box there, in the green box, I noted what KS's commitment was in the safe harbor. So our commitment for outplanting was that we would plant a minimum of 20,000 seedlings during each 5-year period. So far in the first 2 years of the safe harbor, we've planted over 30,000 native seedlings. Most of those are koa, but also a wide variety of other species. And much of this has been done with volunteer work and educational site visits. For koa silviculture, we've established 190. Oh, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Aloha. I'm just curious
Aloha.
about survivorship.
Survivorship. We are not tracking survivorship of all of these, but in general, it's been very good. For the koa, we see the areas that we're planting maturing into closed canopy forests within about 10 years or so. And then we're thinning it and kind of opening it again. But survivorship of the koa has been really good. Survivorship of the other species has also been really good. I'll share some photo points and some images of like before and after next year or the next time I present to you folks to kind of show. But yeah, this is like really impactful restoration work. We're seeing kikuyu pasture turning into diverse forest in some areas and into like really, really nice koa stands in other areas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so onto koa. So we established 197 acres of koa during the first 2 years of the agreement. This photo is actually from the 2018 wildfire area where we're planting koa there. And then we also thinned and pruned 165 acres. And the idea is, we're doing this koa reforestation both for habitat purposes, but also, for harvest purposes in the future. And so we're trying to create koa trees that have, really, really great form and are doing quite well at it. Ungulate management. There's currently about 29,000 acres that is fenced and managed as zero tolerance for feral ungulates. Until this past year, we believe the units were pretty much ungulate free. We hadn't seen any sign in quite some time. But this year we did have some pig ingress where those 2 stars are. And we've been working with the Three Mountain Alliance and DOFA NARS to control that ingress. There's also recently another ingress into the Right Road unit over here that we've been working with NARS on. But total, we're thinking that there's no more than 6 or 7 pigs in the unit with that ingress. We replaced some fence here. This is where the pigs entered into the large unit. And we're actually planning a new fenced unit here that the arrow is pointing to. It'll be about 1,000 acres. And the idea is that'll help to control future pig ingress and also provides an ungulate-free area that's more accessible for educational activities. And the other thing we've done in response to the ingress is the Palakia fence line. That's this one here that comes down between Kilauea Forest and Keoho. Years ago, we took off the top barbed wire strands of the fence, so it was only 4 feet tall. And we're retrofitting it this year to be 6 feet tall because there has been, so much unexpected pig ingress in the last year and a half or so. For weed control, we did about 2,500 acres of weed suppression at Keoho last year, and also surveyed about 5,000 acres to help us plan future weed control efforts. Our main targets are Faya, Ginger, Ivy, and Himalayan Yellow Raspberry. We aim to maintain those below 10% cover, and we're planning some monitoring this summer to give us a better idea of what the current cover is, but it's way below 10%. I don't know if it's even 1% cover when you look at the land area as a whole. But one of our worst weeds actually right now that's been the most difficult is blackberry. That's what you see this guy controlling in the photo. And the blackberry comes up all over the place, even in really dense kikuyu growth, it can still appear. And so that's the main weed that in the upper portion of Keoho, where most of the endangered species are found, that's our biggest weed issue. We maintained fire infrastructure, 4 catchments, 12 water tanks, 3 reservoirs, and all of our primary and secondary access routes. We also maintained passability on the tertiary access routes. It's all those little tiny orange lines. And the new fire break, that's here in gray. This is the area where there was a fire in 2018 that spread into the national park and then back into Keoho, and hopefully this new break will prevent anything like that from happening in the future. Okay, Rapido Hi'a death was first confirmed in Lower Keoho in 2017, and so far confirmed cases and symptomatic trees have been mostly limited to Lower Keoho. This data is from BISC. They haven't done much flying or survey in Upper Keoho because there hasn't been, and it hasn't really been any cases abroad. But we're going to be doing more surveys. We're concerned with how much it's beginning to spread in the lower portions of Keoho. Okay, and then for other activities, we only had 1 avoidance and minimization training this year for 6 individuals. We're still trying to figure out how to run the training online. So we've done a couple of tests of that. But total, there's almost 40 individuals that have been trained in the avoidance and minimization measures in the Safe Harbor Agreement. We had a really successful birding field school last year where we trained a number of folks as primary counters. And we had planned another one this year that was going to target younger students, intermediate and high school students, but it was deferred due to COVID. It was actually planned like for the week after everything shut down. And so looking forward, we're trying to figure out how to do something like that virtually, because we feel like it's a really important contribution that we can make. And then koa harvest. We conducted our first koa harvest since the beginning of the Safe Harbor Agreement. We had a request from the Friends of Hokulea and Hawaii Loa to harvest koa trees to replace the mass booms and spars of Hawaii Loa. And so they gathered 11 koa trees that were fairly small in diameter. And all of these were from the 1970s plantings. But it was a good test for us to be able to, to see how to apply those avoidance and minimization measures to that kind of situation. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to monitoring. So for these slides, got the baseline, the current baseline from the Safe Harbor in the yellow box, and then what the monitoring commitments in the Safe Harbor is in the green box. So for forest bird surveys, we do annual species occupancy surveys. The Three Mountain Alliance leads those. And there's lots of volunteers from different agencies that help out. We surveyed 164 stations and all 4 species were detected. And that's really all we can pretty much say is that, all 4 species are present until someone, every so often USGS does like a really great review of the data. But for now, all we can say is they're present on the property. All 4 species were present in FY19 and all 4 species are still present in FY20. For Nene, DOFA conducts Nene monitoring 1 day per month from October to March. This year, they actually found a nest up near the state cabin. And they believe that it had 4 eggs. They believe that 2 of those eggs hatched based on the eggshells and the qualities of the eggshells that they found. I guess 2 of them were kind of leathery, which led them to think, well, I don't have all the details. I can go back and find them. But anyway, DOFA believes that two of the eggs hatched successfully, but the goslings, their parents, were never seen in person, and they were never seen on any of the remote cameras. There was another gosling, not from this nest, that was observed in December 2019 on a remote camera, and that gosling fledged. But we're not sure where the nest was for that bird. And the baseline is measured in pairs. Currently, that's not the way that DOFA is conducting the surveys, so that might be something for us to look into more in the future. For eel and ope'a, these surveys for species occupancy are conducted every 5 years, so we don't have any updated monitoring. But we did lose 240 acres of baseline habitat in the August 2018 fire. And we've requested with staff to have this considered a force majeure event under the Safe Harbor Agreement, in which case the baseline conditions should be revised to reflect the new habitat conditions. And we've submitted verbal requests, but we need to submit a written request about this for the staff to consider. I'm not sure if it'll come to you folks or not. It might be a minor amendment. And then for Alala, baseline is 0. There's no monitoring required of KS in the agreement. Before the birds were brought back into captivity last year, there was frequent use of KS lands near the release site, but no occupation of habitat on KS lands. And while the ROE is on hold until folks figure out what the next steps are for the release, we are prepared to issue those right of entries if Alala are released back into Pu'umaka'ala. And yeah. Okay, now for endangered plant species, there's a lot to share here, and I think we could do just like a whole presentation just about this. So if you guys ever want to ask us back to do one, I'm happy to. But I'm going to try and summarize as best I can. For endangered plant species, survey of PEP species is done annually by PEP or DOFA. Survey of other founders are done every 2 years by agencies or other cooperating folks. And then survey of outplants is done every 5 years. If DOFA and the agencies aren't able to help with the other surveys, then KS will survey at least once every 5 years. In the Safe Harbor, there's a provision that if we conduct a comprehensive survey of all outplants during the first 2 years of the agreement, that we can reduce our baseline due to outplant mortality. This is something that we were very concerned about when we first signed the agreement, because there were lots of young outplants, and survivorship hasn't always been great for some of these. So we conducted a comprehensive survey, not just of outplants, but of all known endangered plant species over FY19 and FY20. And unfortunately, there was declining population numbers for 6 species. Some of this was due to poor outplant survival, but for other species, it might be due to lifespan considerations, that they just don't live for that long. And those species also weren't reproducing. 2 species are no longer present on the property. There was a single Plantago hawaiiensis in Mauka Keoho, and we've been unable to relocate it despite extensive survey. We have found some Plantago pachyphylla near where the hawaiiensis was supposedly located, or not supposedly, near where the hawaiiensis was located. And so for a little bit, we kind of went down a rabbit hole thinking that, well, maybe there never was a Plantago hawaiiensis and it was only pachyphylla, but since then, we've been able to confirm with folks that yes, it really was a Plantago hawaiiensis, and it's no longer present on the property. So that will be a target for restoration in the future. And then Phyllostigea racemosa. This is one of those special concern species that has very, very low numbers anywhere. There were never any founders at Keoho. The 4 in the baseline were all outplants, and none of them are currently present. So this is another one that we want to target for outplanting in the near future.
Namaka, for Phyllostigea, the 2 species on Kauai that we worked with a bunch at Limahuli, they were secondary successional species. So you really had to pay attention to the kind of the successional nature of the canopy and stuff. They're going to do these Phyllostigea renovans and Exalta, I think is the other one, is like if there's a landslide, not landslide, but like if a tree fall or something and opens up a bunch of light, then they just come out over the place, gangbusters. And as the forest closes in, they start to dwindle again until there's another disturbance. So maybe that's just something to consider for you guys.
Yeah, mahalo, Kavika. It's kind of something we've noticed with Phyllostigea volutna. It has not done well when planted into closed canopy forest, but there's some planted, along a fence line that gets a lot of light, and it's growing like crazy. Like it's overtaken the fence line and made it difficult to do repairs. The Racemosa, I think we definitely need to try out planting it in different places, and we're going to look to to folks like Rob Robichaud and the experts at TOFA to help advise us on where best those should be planted. But so far they really haven't done well at Keoho. They'll grow for a few years and then they'll die back, and we won't see them again. At least in the areas they've been outplanted so far. But on a positive note, we did find new individuals of 4 species, and we actually found new populations of I think Vicia, the Cremantia lindsayana, and Asplenium peruvianum insular as well, which is exciting. Once we finish the survey of everything that we knew was present at Keoho, this year we've been doing some surveys of other areas to try to see if we can find any other locations. And so good news, we did find some, especially for Vicia, it's great news. And then we've also observed natural regeneration, very limited, of 2 species. There was one Cyanea shipmanii, you can see it in this picture here, that was growing really well under some outplants at Pu'ukipu. And then about a month later, folks came back and it was broken off. We're not sure what did it, if it was, maybe game birds, really not sure, but now it's enclosed in a cage. It's still alive, but not quite as healthy as it looked in this picture. And then Vicia, we've noticed lots of regeneration of Vicia at Pu'ukipu. Not all of those seedlings are surviving, but it's just really exciting to see them growing at all. Okay. And then we're going to be requesting baseline adjustment due to outplant mortality for these 4 species: Phyllostigea racemosa, Cremantia lindsayana, Cyanea shipmanii, and Phyllostigea volutna. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a bit. Here's some numbers for you. I don't know how closely we want to go over these, but this is the baseline population units, the 2019 population units, and then new population units that we found in 2020. And then baseline individuals, 2019 individuals, and new individuals that we found in 2020. And there's like a whole story behind each of these numbers. For a couple species, we found some outplantings that the state had done that they thought were on state lands that were actually on KS lands. So that's increased the number of populations on our property. There's some places where we've lost entire population units, probably because they weren't the most ideal habitat. there's areas where we've found new populations, new plants. So there's a lot to share here. And like I said, we're happy to do a presentation just on the rare plant species if folks are interested. Okay, so moving on to baseline adjustments. There's 2 baseline adjustments that we're requesting. We're going to follow up with this in writing. The first is related to the 2018 fire. We talked about earlier. It's a relatively small amount of habitat, 240 acres compared to the baseline of 18,500 acres. But we want to use this amendment process so that we understand how it works if there really is a large force majeure event that affects baseline. And then for outplant mortality, we have summarized here the baseline numbers for the 4 species and then how much we're reducing it by. For most, it isn't much. Clermontia, we're reducing by 13 outplants, but there were only 19 outplants to begin with. Though we have found, a number of new Clermontia lindsayana at Keoho over the last couple of years. Cyania shipmanii reduced by 182 outplants. It's a large number, but there was a large number that were planted. Phyllostigea racemosa is probably the most concerning because there were only those 4 outplants and they're no longer present. And then for Phyllostigea velutina, all of the founders, many of the founders are present, but all the outplants are no longer present. Okay. And that's the end of the presentation. I covered it quickly, but I'm happy to take questions or comments.
Awesome, great work.
Can we just clap or something?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And cheer.
Oh, yay.
This is everything that a safe harbor should be.
Yeah.
Thank you, Namaka.
Yeah, it's outstanding.
State of the art.
Namaka, a question in terms of reducing the habitat, based on the fire. I mean, aren't you planning on having that restored and it'll come back? So is there a need to reduce the baseline as opposed to just leave it as is and just recover it?
It means that we will be out of compliance until those areas are restored, which will probably, I don't know if it's out of compliance, but we'll be below baseline for a time if we don't adjust it. I think what we're really concerned about is the potential that there's like some huge fire or event in the future. And so we kind of want to test the process to see how it works with this one. But yes, we are restoring that habitat. We've already outplanted, what was it, about 150 acres of the wildfire area in Koa. And so that might be even better habitat because before most of it was shrubland, and now we'll have hopefully a closed canopy forest.
Then one other question, I may have missed it, but how is it working with Clermontia peleana? And where are you finding that successful?
I was going to add a slide about that. Okay, so the Clermontia peleana, there's a baseline of 0. Oh, it's not even on here. Okay, there's a baseline of 0 because there weren't any present at Keoho when we set the baseline prior to the agreement, but we've outplanted, I can look up the numbers for you, but they're doing really well. They're doing really well, and the exciting thing was that they flowered for the first time this year. We've been waiting for a long time to see that happen, and there was lots of flowers. And so we're excited to see what happens next. But I can look up for you real quick.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see those. I mean, because just for everybody else, I mean, that's a species that essentially is down to very few individuals, if any, in the wild that are natural. That we only knew a few places, from all of our surveys previously on the island, and so it's very exciting to see this one come back from the ashes.
Yeah, they're doing really well. Oh, go ahead.
No, you answer Jim first. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think we learned a lot from some of the earlier outplantings of other lobeliads in Kilauea forest that they don't do well, in closed canopy forest. And so by the time we started outplanting the Clermontia Teleana, Rob was directing Rob Robichaud was directing folks to plant them into light gaps. And up onto fallen trees and that sort of thing. Yeah. So they've done really well because of how they were planted.
It'll be really interesting to see, since you do still have a robust bird population up there, how those Claremontias, fare in terms of setting viable seed.
Yep.
So, Namaka, have you done any outplanting of the Vicia?
We have not since the beginning of the safe harbor, but that's another thing that we're working on now. We're actually working on some agreements with DOFA, a right of entry and an MOA specifically for Vicia restoration. So we're gonna hopefully be collecting seeds and cuttings from all of the individuals at Keoho, growing those out and then replanting back at Keoho and elsewhere. So we've got a strategy that we're designing now. Yes.
I mean, Vicia has always been a concern because it was extinct and it was rediscovered and but we've seen the populations tend to continue to decline over time. Do you have this in genetic storage also? I mean, is that in Nellie's lab or elsewhere?
There was a plant in her greenhouse that survived for a long time, and it has since died, I heard this year. I think they might have a few seeds in storage, but it is not in good storage. That's kind of what kicked us into gear this year or last year was realizing that the population was declining. There wasn't good genetic storage, and so we need to act swiftly to do something about it. So we're hoping to have all those agreements in place by the time the Vicia start to seed, this summer and fall, so that we can make those collections as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, that's really important. To work with the Lion folks to get it into genetic storage, both seed and potential.
Oh, the Lion folks.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's not at Lion, to my knowledge. That's right.
Okay. You connect with them. If you don't, if you don't have the connections, I can make it. But that's really important because I'm really concerned about that species disappearing for good.
This is a signature plant species for this area. It's the place for this.
Yeah, it was the first endangered plant species listed for Hawaii.
Yep. And to be honest, it's a bit of the impetus for the development of this safe harbor agreement.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So and we realize that we have a special responsibility to that plant. It's only found here, and we will have a lot to report about that next year.
Good.
I hope.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Namaka, I want to thank you for a really thorough presentation. So my comment is not so much in regards to what you presented, which was amazing. It looks like this is a super successful agreement, but maybe more directed at those who are putting the agreements together and thinking about things for the future. At the beginning, to follow up on Kavika's question, asking about the success, it sounds like in the agreement, it was the number of outplants that was put into the agreement. And I would just encourage for future agreements, thinking about the outcomes that we want rather than the action. And so, for example, if we want coverage or a particular density of a particular plant in the future, if that's the metric of success, and then work backward to say, okay, how many outplants would need to be planted to get to that or something. And that way, when it's reported, it's more about the progress toward a particular goal rather than the action itself being the measure of success. Otherwise, I mean, if the thing written into the agreement is 20,000 outplants and you plant 20,000 outplants and they all fail, the person has done their job. They've done everything we asked them to do, but we haven't achieved what we wanted to. So maybe I'm misunderstanding the way it was set up though.
Then really, if you outplant 20,000, but you end up with 50% survivorship in a closed canopy forest, and you're a success ecologically, then you shouldn't be penalized. And so that's kind of what I was getting at, very much what Melissa's saying.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I completely agree. And there are success criteria related to, there are appropriate success criteria looking at outcomes for a wide variety of things in the Safe Harbor Agreement, but it all relates back to the endangered species. Some of the criteria related to the outplants of the non-listed species is open-ended because we know that there's going to be a high level of, there could be a high level mortality there, and it's not possible for them to monitor at that level to get some of that information. And so there's, for some of the actions that are not directly related to the listed species, it is an action as a success criteria rather than as the outcome of success criteria, recognizing that, yeah, I would recommend reading the Safe Harbor Agreement. There's a lot, this is a really intricate Safe Harbor Agreement with a whole lot of different actions that encompass a very large area. And in order to make it doable for Kamehameha schools, it is not specific in some areas and then very specific in others.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. That's super useful.
So yeah, maybe in the future we could have all of our Safe Harbor reports be more centered around what the success metrics are. And this was great, Namaka. So I mean, but it would be good for us to have that information going into it. Thanks.
And I think this agreement is incredible because it comes from decades of long work of doing awesome work for years. And the partnership between the Three Mountain Alliance and the state and the conservation area that it covers beyond the boundaries of Keauhou. If anybody hasn't been here before, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really unique about this is I think this effort really confirms the commitment the KS has for conservation in these areas, and how to mix that in with extraction use in the lower portion where they're doing the silviculture part of it, and how that meshes in with this. But I think the other thing which is really amazing is the fact that well before the safe harbor was finalized, I mean, there was an awful lot of conservation work that was done, both in terms of fencing, controlling animals, controlling weeds, and outplanting. And the baselines that are reflected for many of these species are in many cases, they are for the ones that had a non-zero baseline, the plants are ones that they outplanted, and so they're already assuming that those are part of their baseline, even though before they started, many of those species were zero. So it really is a real, very significant SHA.
A question about the slide, Namaka, where you were cutting down trees for Hawaii Loa. You mentioned it was a good test for the avoidance. I was curious, is that birds only, or is that birds and bats as well?
Birds, bats, plants. There's avoidance and minimization measures for all of the covered species, and so it was good for us to kind of look at this on a small scale and to see how to do it right. And I think we did more survey than was required by the Safe Harbor prior to the harvest, to make us feel good about it.
And Namaka's being modest. It's hard to try and avoid all of the different species on this property because they have overlapping breeding seasons. There's not a single month of the year where you don't have either forest birds, bats, or breeding. And so the avoidance minimization measures here are extremely intricate, and it takes a lot of thought in putting together what those look like and how to train staff and how to actually implement it in a way that is consistent. So thank you, Namaka, for doing that.
Okay, well, this is a landmark project and a landmark agreement, and really appreciate all your efforts and all the work that's gone into it. So thank you very much, Namaka. Appreciate it.
Namaka, sorry, I have one more question, unrelated to the Safe Harbor Agreement, really, but we're dealing with bats a lot. And yesterday we had a mitigation project that was making bat lanes to try and increase habitat. I was just wondering, as a Hawaiian ecologist, if you had any perspective that would be worth sharing about any observations you've had of bat foraging behavior in this Keauhou or anywhere else?
That's a hard one. Where I live, there. there's lots and lots of bats. I live in South Kona, and I live between Kipahoehoe Natural Area Reserve and Manuka Natural Area Reserve. And especially in Kipahoehoe Natural Area Reserve, when you drive through there at twilight, there are bats everywhere above the highway. Like they're just like flying like this sometimes during certain times of the year. And so it makes me think that, you know, maybe bat lanes could be a useful thing, but it's also the lights of the cars, I think, that are attracting insects into that opening that cause them to be attracted to that area. But I don't know. I don't really have any other good knowledge to share.
But I think it's also a challenge. It's also a challenge in the sense that, I mean, it's like, you know, the person who lost his keys at night and he looks under the street light because he can see it there. You know, if you know, you can see, you know, bats on that corridor as you're driving there, and we don't really have a good picture of what's happening above that forest, above that corridor too. I mean, I think bat lanes are certainly an accumulator, you know, zone. I don't think that it would merit chopping up a forest to put lanes in there to make that better. You know, I'd really question that without really strong evidence. And I know that, you know, the work that Frank Buonacorso and Marcos and other folks did over in Laupahoehoe in a closed canopy forest found that as being a very, very important foraging zone above the canopy too. So, I mean, you know, there's a lot we still need to learn about that, but there's no question that, you know, bats do accumulate along lanes like that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
Thank you much. Thank you, Namaka. That's excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Namaka. Please pass your thanks along to your team.
Mahalo. Aloha.
To the whole team, right?
Okay, thanks. Okay, next we're going to go to Reggie David and Hokuola HCP.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Reggie.
Good morning, Reggie.
Reginald.
Good to see you.
So, should I share my screen? How's the best way to do this?
Yeah, you can share your screen on your end and just
Okay.
control the keys.
Going to it right now. Okay, so obviously this project in one version or another has been brought before this committee for over a decade. It started out as an MOU with Fish and Wildlife Service during the construction phase back in 2007-8. And then we moved on and got state and federal.
Hey, Reggie,
permits.
sorry to interrupt. We can't see your screen.
Oh, really? Sorry.
No screenage yet.
Okay, hang on a sec. Let me figure out how to share it. Oh, I'm supposed to press a button, right? Oh,
Yeah, there's the
sorry.
green.
I'm at the bottom. Share screen.
Yeah, got it.
There we go.
Okay. So, you know, this has had a long genesis. And the initial goals and objectives have changed over the course of the permitting history. Initially, it was expected that the construction and change in habitat caused by mass grading would really affect Nene, and that actually turned out not to be correct. And as we moved forward and we finally got an HCP in place and ITL ITP in 2012, the direction of the project and what we were mandated to do changed from enhancing the habitat to attract Nene and to increase production was changed to maintaining and changing the habitat to no longer attract more Nene, because when we started out in 2007 or 8, and Michelle, correct me if you remember this differently, I think we had 28 birds on the property, and come 2013, we had rather a lot more, and eventually it became a nuisance issue for the airport. So the property covers, you know, basically 625 acres. It changed hands in 2016. Obviously, the state permit runs with the land. The federal permit was rolled over in 2016. So our permit authorized take is in front of you. And here's the results to date. As you can see, the two things are of significance in this data are one, that we did not end up taking a lot of nene, but obviously we've had a major problem with gallinule, which were almost non-existent on the property when we started, but have suddenly increased significantly. And obviously that's been a concern to both the landowner, our HCP team on site, and to this committee. This past reporting period, we had 3 take, 1 Hawaiian coot and 2 gallinule. The coot was a golf ball strike, and both of the gallinule were vehicle hits, which has sort of been the norm on this property. I think this is probably the first HCP report before this committee that is in the hospitality industry that was significantly affected by COVID and the shutdown. And essentially the property shut down in March of 2020 and did not reopen until long after the season ended. During this reporting period, the nene activity, we had 15 nests. First nest was found in September, and last nest in January 2020. That's about normal for this property. We had 46 eggs laid, 41 of them hatched. So we had a hatchling survival rate of 56%, which is pretty decent for nene. Okay, why won't let me do that? So this is a breakdown. All this is in our annual report. We essentially had 15 nests, 14 of them hatched. 1 was abandoned. What's happened over the last few years on the property after something close to 600 birds were translocated, and Wildlife Services has started to haze birds with dogs, that we a lot of our nesting birds are younger than they used to be, and we don't have the a cohesive flock that kind of teaches the other birds how to do things. So we had 1 abandoned nest. Not sure totally why. There are only 2 eggs in that, which is unusual in itself. Usually we get 3 to 4 eggs in a nest. And we had 3 eggs that just disappeared out of the nest, and we have no idea what happened to those.
Reggie, I'm sorry, one quick follow-up question on that. So you have 600 adults and you had 15 nests, is that correct?
No. We got up to 750 birds on the property. Let me go back here.
Back in 2012.
Right. So, yeah, we had 50. I think at this, we'll get to that in the next 2 slides down, but we have less than 50 birds on the property.
Okay, so less than 50 birds, 15 nests, really high hatching rate and a really high success to fledging rate. And you have, obviously you're on Kauai, no mongoose, but I'm assuming you have cat control and rat control at the site, or no?
We will get to that in the next slides.
Thank you.
So when we actually do have abandoned eggs or dead eggs in nests, we do recover them. We do open them, take metrics, look and see what's going on. Basically, the 5 eggs we were able to recover, what we had is 4 eggs that were infertile and 1 that was a fully developed embryo. So potentially speaks to genetics, but that's tough to figure out when you've been moving birds around the way we've been moving them. We also do a lot of waterbird surveys, waterbird and migratory surveys. We did 91 of them this reporting period. I think we're supposed to do 1 a month, but it's something to keep people out there running around and really searching the property. So the highest number we had of geese, answering Michelle's question, it was 61. And the average is about 20 birds. Ducks have always been sort of come and go on that property, 14, 16. The big story here, once again, as in the last 3-4 years, is just the incredible number of gallinule. That's really a lot of birds. And we, unlike some of the other ones, we always have them on property. And originally they were only in like 1 or 2 locations. Now they're all over the property. And a lot of the times it's not associated with water at all. So they're in the middle of the golf course, they're walking down the roads. It is what it is. And for the birders in the group, we had a canvasback, which is pretty exciting. It's a rare bird for Kauai. Thank you, Michelle. So we had, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've really gotten a lot more nests of the other T&E waterbird species. We had 30 gallinule nests, and we had 27 chicks survive to fledging, and we had 4 Hawaiian coot nests and 8 to fledge. For those of you that have been listening to these talks for many years, we never had a Hawaiian coot nest on the property until about 5 years ago. So this is kind of interesting. Hawaiian ducks, the numbers just vary all over the place. But we had 15 nests, and we had 39 chicks survive. And this past year, we did not have any black-necked stilts. We've only had them nest on the property, I think, 3 times in the last 5 years, and never before that. So answering Melissa's question, yeah, we trap. We trap 24/7, 365 days a year. I think our permit says we're supposed to have 10 traps. We've got at least 63 traps out. We removed 41 cats, 1 dog, 25 pigs, 86 bullfrogs, and an awful lot of chickens as usual.
Sorry, I got a question about that.
Yep.
What about egrets?
Yep.
Are egrets in something you guys are controlling at all?
That's developed into a major problem now that we have people everywhere walking around trying to shoot egrets on a golf course, and with people that are paying $3 million, $4 million for a condo is not sitting well. So it's a problem.
Sorry, so the short answer is no, there's no cattle egret removal going on right now?
That is correct.
Okay.
So we have a state-funded program that's being administered by a federal agency, Wildlife Services, which is hazing nanny off the property using trained border collies. And that started in 2019. They're hazing on a daily basis. And the initial part of their study, they did tag 10 nene, and they had a fair fairly large number of mortalities. The hazing's been effective in moving many of the birds. But I think we've gotten to the point where we have a lot of birds that have kind of figured out what's going on. And the minute they see their carts, they're out of there, and they're not really being chased by the dogs much. So this season, as of yesterday morning, we had 19 nests plus a dropped egg. So we're on track to have pretty much the same number of nests as last season. So open
Just
to
to be
questions.
clear, though, those actions are not part of the HCP or part of Hokuala's actions. That is a separate action that's being done by Wildlife Services and HDOT.
Correct, and they have their own permits, state and federal permits to do that work.
Thank you, Reggie. I'm still thinking about the egrets because we know they predate on waterbird chicks. So is that, are all the species in that site, or is what is specifically in the agreement? And so it's kind of a.
Can you repeat?
I'm wondering.
Can you repeat that last sentence, Kavika? I didn't quite get that.
I'm kind of thinking out loud, but if we know egrets predate waterbird chicks, I'm wondering why, or I'm wondering how we can have that be included in control. I'm wondering just what the nexus is for that, because shooting egrets is not the only way to control them. So I just wanted to open that up for discussion.
Right. The one interesting thing is that the area that we produce most of our waterbird chicks in is in what used to be an active 18-hole golf course, and which is now what we call sort of our incubator pond. And there are no cattle egret there for some obscure reason. It's very tall grass, and it's most of the time, it's probably 7 or 8 feet tall guinea grass. Where the cattle egrets are is on the golf course. And so we're not seeing them around the area that we're producing most of our gallinals and coots at all. And of course, on Kauai, we have a gajillion cattle egrets. So that's a tough one. Any great suggestions, we would be very happy to attempt to implement those measures, but it's a difficult one.
I think elsewhere it's been, if you think about roosting sites, that's one of the ways that people have shifted where the cattle egrets are spending their time. And I think the bigger concern is the numbers of cattle egrets that you're seeing, even if you don't see them predominantly hanging out in the areas where the nesting is happening, it's right next door. So they're gonna move where the food is, and during the nesting season and when the chicks are running around, they're gonna pluck them off. So I think it's worth not just throwing our hands up and saying there's nothing we can do about it, but recognizing it's a potential problem and considering some of these habitat modification measures that could be done, or removal at the roost sites as opposed to where they're running around, which might be in the middle of people and not conducive to removal. So there may be nearby sites where they roost that would be much more conducive to removal.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'll work with the agencies and see what we can come up with.
I know in the past, USDA used to use dynamite, so if shooting's a problem, you know, they used to go dynamite the colonies. That might be a little more problematic.
When you figure that we've got owners that are complaining on a regular basis that we've got wildlife services chasing birds with dogs, yeah, that's going to go over real well. But it's a good idea.
Yeah,
it'll work.
It worked. Yeah, no, you probably won't be able to do that.
No, I'll work with the agencies. You know, one of the huge issues here is that this is one private landowner, so trying to control major cattle egret roosts on other people's property is not easy.
Yeah, and you can maybe work with DOFA over there. I know that to Melissa's point, roost site control is usually the way that we've gone about it in the past. So. That'd be
Okay, well, we have a very close working relationship with Thomas's team on Kauai. So I'll talk to them next week and see if they've got some good ideas, and you know, Jason and some of his field crew will definitely take a serious look at to see what we could do to reduce the numbers in the area.
Great.
For those of you who are relatively new to this project, I'll just say that this is a deceptively complex one because of the challenges with the airport and the need to reduce the number of nene that are in and around, that are contributing to an aircraft safety issue. Part of the HCP is to not increase nene and to not do things that would promote habitat for nene on the resort. That's really hard to do when they are trying to provide habitat and protection for the water birds on the site. And luckily they haven't necessarily all been nesting in the same areas. So there's some areas that are being managed for water birds in some parts of the resort, and other areas where they're purposely trying to modify habitat to make it less preferable for nene on other areas of the resort. Reggie, my question to you is just, how do we think that we're doing on water bird production? And do you have any concerns with the ability to meet the water bird production needs while still continuing your efforts to deter nene?
Well, we basically developed that new pond, that Mokihana 3, specifically for the water birds, because the only way that we could figure out how to sort of do the double whammy was to produce habitat that was not attractive to nene, that was very attractive to the other water birds, and which was relatively protected because of the nature of that habitat, where it's essentially an old golf course where we've allowed the vegetation to go completely rank, and we just have a couple of ponds in there that we maintain well and trap around, and that's where we're taking out the bullfrogs, because obviously they're a big issue to coots and gallinules. So that it was a very purposeful decision to try to create a nursery, basically, that was not in the area that nene are in. And it's an area that, because the nene are not there, they're not running the dogs there. Wildlife Service is not running the dogs there. So it's kind of a win-win in that we're making a lot of water birds. We're not attracting nene to it because they just don't like it when it's that thick. And we're not having Wildlife Service dogs that are necessary for the airport running around through there. So that was kind of our solution on how to hit both goals, which are somewhat divergent from each other.
Thanks. And one other question, I realized that the resort was basically shut down this season, but how are we doing on the avoidance minimization for newels? And was the aid station still up and running even though the resort was closed? Was there any issues during the seabird fallout season?
We had no TNEs down either season. The aid station is not actually on the resort property. It's at the adjacent property, the Marriott Hotel. That is still present and operational.
Thanks, Reggie.
Sorry, one more follow-up question on the cattle egrets. Those numbers seem really high if the concern in part is avian impacts on aircraft. It seems like a potential win-win to collaborate with the airport to increase cattle egret removal for aircraft safety with the side benefit of reducing water bird mortality. Your numbers of cattle egrets were much higher than the numbers of any other species. So from an avian risk perspective from aircraft, it seems like your biggest risk is maybe I don't know. Nene are bigger bodied, but I don't know the physics.
I don't understand. I honestly do not totally understand quite how airports looks at birds, but no, we have a lot of cattle egrets in the area. There are massive roosts all around Lahui, and the birds move around like crazy. So to me, common sense is it's an issue. If nene are an issue, if other birds are an issue, then if plover and nutmeg manakins are an issue, then cattle egrets certainly should be an issue. So,
Yeah, seems like a potentially productive area of conversation of common ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic too, because I mean, FAA is the one that stepped in for the Cyanotech project. And when the stilts were breeding in the so-called lake there, you know, which is adjacent to the Kona airport, and you know, basically shut down that operation for producing stilt, which is one of the most productive stilt habitats we've had in the state. And we started getting mixed messages on this one from FAA on that one, and DOT.
yeah, and we had 32 nests at Cyanotech in a 1.5 acre pond.
Yeah. And I think they are control. I think you know, the airports are controlling cattle egrets certainly at Hilo. You see them shooting there and so forth, and I've seen them elsewhere too. I thought they were doing that already at Kauai too. So
I suspect they're doing it within their fences. They're just probably not venturing out. And the most effective way to get at cattle egrets is through the roost. So
Bruce, absolutely right.
Okay, well, we'll work on that. I'll get a meeting with Thomas and see what we can do with that.
great.
You're Reggie.
Any other questions? Comments?
Keep on keeping on, Reggie. That's good stuff. Thanks.
Very much.
Thanks,
Reggie.
Jim.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Reggie.
Good to see
Hello, Michelle.
Okay, given that, let's go ahead and take a lunch break. Oh, we're right on time.
No way.
Oh man. Well, we got a minute we could kill here, but oh no, 11:30. Perfect. So let's go ahead and take a half an hour break, and then we're going to come back. And Gordon is going. We're going to talk about the research. The bat research on the Big Island and making some changes to that, perhaps. So, half
So
hour.
what time back?
12 o'clock sharp.
12 o'clock. We'll do.
Great. Thank y'all.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.